Thank you, Chairman. Secretary DeVos, thank you so much for being here and giving us the opportunity to have this conversation with you. I am curious if you're familiar with the Minnesota School of Business and Global University.
I'm not familiar with that specific school.
Okay. Do you know that they were found to be engaged in consumer fraud?
If they were, I'm assuming there are some borrower defense claims pending for them.
Okay. So let me just enlighten you. We've sent you many letters from our delegation. In my district in 2016, the courts found that Minnesota School of Business and Global University engaged in consumer fraud and purposefully deceived their students by misrepresenting the job opportunities that would be available to their criminal justice graduates. Madam Secretary, that same year, your department independently reviewed the evidence and came to the same conclusion as the courts. The students were blatantly misled and taken advantage of. 1,336 Minnesota students were systematically misled to believe that they will obtain a degree and credits that were essentially meaningless, losing not only $33.8 million, but their time and countless opportunities. Let's take a minute to just imagine if these weren't just students. Let's imagine that they were corporations. The administration and our colleagues on the other side of the aisle, and probably you, would be up in arms. Corporate executives would not only get their debt forgiven by our government, they would also get compensation for their lost time, lost opportunities, and psychological distress. But Madam Secretary, you don't seem to be up in arms. Nobody seems to be concerned with what's happening with these students. Students who do not have access to corporate attorneys to make their case. Instead, they are struggling to make ends meet as they continue to face accruing interest, negative credit reporting, and the inability to restart their education, all the while hoping the government will do the right thing. I'd like to request unanimous consent to enter into the record 2 affidavits.
Objection.
These are from my constituents Whitney and Cheryl Stellan, whose borrower defense applications have been on hold since January of this year. Between the 2 of them, they have approximately $78,000 in crippling student debt. To make matters worse, once a borrower defaults, the consequences are severe and results in a snowball effect where a borrower might lose their eligibility to receive additional federal student aid and see devastating effects to their credit. Memo after memo, the Education Department career staff sent you memos that indicate that these students deserve nothing less than full relief. I know that you've said you haven't read these memos yet, but reports have come out, and I would have expected that you would take the time to read them before appearing before us today. I ask for unanimous consent to enter these 3 memos into the record.
Without objection.
I feel like you should be ashamed of the fact that you don't have answers to these memos, that you haven't looked at these memos, that you haven't taken the responsibility that you have as a leader to be prepared to give us a response. And I think the public should be ashamed that they have a Secretary of Education that's not putting the interests of students before the interests of the wealthy that are benefiting from defrauding these students. I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, if I may respond.
Thank you. The gentlelady's time has expired. Secretary can respond.
Congresswoman, with all due respect, I am very much focused on doing what's right for these students. And the memos to which you're referring preceded me, and they may have been relevant to, they were relevant to conversation about how we proceeded with policy, but administrations changed. and policies change.
They are precisely relevant to the conversation you were preparing to come to talk to us today. And in your preparation, you should have read those memos. I yield back.
Gentlelady's time has expired, and I recognize myself for 5 minutes. First, a lot has been said about whether or not this applies to for-profits.